Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of All Things Money. And my name's Ammar. And today we've got a very special episode, largely focusing on the US tariffs and how trade is really working out. And for that, we have a very special guest today. That's Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, who is currently serving on the Prime Minister's Committee on US Tariffs and has also served as Pakistan's ambassador to the World Trade Organization. He knows anything and everything about tariffs, and the conversation with him will be really helpful in really understanding what's going to happen going forward and how Pakistan needs to basically maneuver around the same. So, Dr. Saab, a pertinent question that's everyone asking nowadays is essentially the US trade tariffs. The US is imposing tariffs on China. China is imposing retaliatory tariffs. What really is going to play out and how does that work out for Pakistan? Just broad question there.
Yes, but future is so uncertain. I mean, I don't think they can go on for too long. China has already said that it has reached the upper limit. It's not going to further raise its tariff. But whatever already tariffs are, they're extremely high. So they have to, some way, one of them has to blink, or both of them have to find some solution, because that can't continue. And for Pakistan, okay, fortunately, we have 3 months, a reprieve. I mean, delayed, tariffs have been delayed. So during these 3 months, we can negotiate our way. But for China and US, there's no delay. So it's going on now.
So, what do you think will happen? How do you think will this pan out? Who will blink first? Who is maybe like poised to lose more if the stalemate continues?
I think it's normally trade wars are a lose-lose situation. I mean, they're not going to be likely a winner. But if we look at previously in what happened in 2017-18, what happened was that, okay, US started it and China retaliated, but this was limited. I mean, there was only a certain number of goods and limited, and they didn't go on. Obviously, subsequently, President Biden increased some more tariffs on, say, like electric vehicles, like solar panels and such things. But it was mostly confined, and more or less they're adjusted to it. But it didn't work out for US what they were trying to achieve. Neither it reduced their overall, it reduced a little bit of their trade, bilateral trade with China, but their deficit really kept increasing because when previously China had already started moving its industry to some other neighboring countries like Vietnam, like Cambodia, like Thailand, etc. So overall, those goods were still going. So China's exports were increasing while the US deficit was also widening. Yes.
All right. So, and we see that this time around, it's just much worse than it was in 2017-18.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Many, many times much worse. First, the overall tariffs are much higher this time, and the scope is much, much broader. Now, it covers almost all products. Previously, it was limited. For example, previously, US focus was more on manufactured goods and some limit, and China's was more on agriculture goods like soybean, etc. But now it covers almost everything.
Do we see any examples in history of such massive tariffs? Maybe even if you go back a few hundred years, do we have any examples of something similar that would have happened and how it played out?
Well, first, the world was not so much interconnected as it is now. There's one example which has some relevance, but this is much bigger than that. That was the US imposed tariffs in 1930. What they called Smoot-Hawley tariffs. I mean, two congressmen got together and they put tariffs, and originally it was meant to cover a few agriculture products where those congressmen were interested. But then many others, industrial goods, etc., they got in, and they ended up having tariffs on something like 20,000 products. And there was a reaction from their major trade partners. And immediately the world trade started falling very seriously for US as well as the trading partners. Unemployment, there was already, it was in the middle of big depression, whatever they call it, big
The
recession
Great
or
Depression.
Great Depression. Yes. And that kind of prolonged due to these tariffs. And I think there was a realization that this cannot work. So in, I think 1934, they, they passed another legislation called the Reciprocal Tariff Act. But this was not quite like this reciprocal. That reciprocal meant that lowering of tariffs. I mean, that okay, US said we'll lower, you lower. And then on, they realized that, this tariff war is not the right thing to do. And, subsequently, after then there was in between the Second World War. And after that, they realized that they should have some system. So they were agreed on a general agreement on tariffs and trade called GATT, which will manage trade. But since then, I mean, since 47, when it came into being, since 47 till almost Trump's first term, any tariffs were according to WTO rules, because they allow some trade defense measures. If a country feels that another country is dumping their products or, and subsidizing or something, there was a system you could do this. But this is the first time that uh, regard to what's happening, US put these tariffs, although what the US says is that there's national emergency, and under their national emergency, they can do this, and they don't need to seek approval of World Trade Organization.
Do you think that the security exceptions of WTO are applicable in this case? And you're talking about the bench or something.
Yes. So when it was brought before the WTO dispute settlement body, that panelists, the group of three panelists, they kind of ruled that this is not an economic emergency, and these tariffs are violent. They didn't rule in favor of US, but the countries which complained against it. But US viewpoint was that it's for for the US president to determine what is an economic emergency, and WTO has already provided for exception. But since WTO's appellate body, which finally rules on these things, it's no more functional because the US had already kind of blocked appointments to the membership of, I mean, there are 7 permanent judges, and US had already blocked it, and it doesn't exist. So it was not finally ruled at the appellate body stage.
All right. So just curious, essentially, what constitutes a national security exception? Like whenever such things are given, what does it entail?
It's normally if it's left to the country itself. What they determine. For example, the war between between Ukraine and Russia is a national emergency, and things of this kind.
All right, that makes sense. So, what kind of precedence does this set for developing countries like Pakistan? Like, if we have to evolve a trade strategy, what should we really be doing after all this?
I mean, there's not much leverage that Pakistan has to indulge in such kind of things because our trade share is very little. It's not even 0.1%. So, and there is already a provision in the WTO rules that if a country feels in any way it's some other country is dumping good or giving subsidies or just hurting its industry, there are those conditions that you can deal with that through your trade defense measures, and we have that law. If we ever need it, we can do it. I was going to refer to India, Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, India, they don't trade with each other. It's one of those things. I mean.
All right. So, what interest Or let's say, I would say, what reforms do you think are urgently needed at the WTO? And do you think developing countries like Pakistan can play any kind of role in this?
Well, I mean, the most important reform they need at the WTO is to revive that appellate body. But WTO is a member-driven organization, and if the members don't agree, if the US, for example, is blocking it, they think that the current WTO appellate body is overreaching its mandate, and these things should be sorted out through negotiations. So, I mean, Pakistan can play a positive role by moving these documents, but I think it's beyond Pakistan's economic. It's for big countries like EU, like China, like US, to figure out how to revive the WTO appellate body.
All right, sir. Okay, so again, more specific on Pakistan. What are the key weaknesses in Pakistan's trade policy architecture that you think need to be urgently addressed?
Well, I think Pakistan, personally, I think Pakistan has one of the worst trade policies. I mean, the countries have moved on. There was, let me give you two or three instances why I think. I mean, in the last century, 1960, 70, 80, many countries believed in those import substitution industrialization. Okay, they'll have high tariffs so that they can protect their industry, and this way they can industrialize. Now, after a while, all these countries realize, most countries, not everyone, realize that this policy is not working because it gives undue protection to local industry, which does not become protective. So, some of the countries moved on very early on, like Taiwan moved very early on, opened up in industry to competition. Then South Korea did. Then one by one, I mean, by 86, Vietnam decided, then China decided in 1980, and India 91, 92, things like that. Pakistan was, in bits and pieces. Okay, it agreed to move on and lower its tariffs in the 1990s, but stopped in 2000. And since then, we have had no reforms. The rest of the world has moved on from import substitution strategy to export-led growth. But Pakistan hasn't really, because it is still one of the, I mean, according to the World Bank, maybe our relevant ministries won't agree. They say our weighted average tariff is about the same, but they interpret another way. But the World Bank says that your tariffs are at least twice the global average and three times the export-led countries, ASEAN countries, etc. So that's number one problem. The other problem that we have is that we very much believe that tariffs, they should be cascading. Cascading means that you have very low tariffs on the raw material and components and very high duties on the finished products. What happens is, I mean, this makes a lot of common sense, but what happens is that the industries which have this protection, this high level of difference between the raw materials, this thing, they like to sell within the country because they make more profit within the country rather than go out and compete. So our all industrial strategy is to encourage our local manufacturers or assemblers to sell within the countries, within Pakistan. So these are the two big problems. But then I have a couple of, maybe one more I can mention, that countries have in the recent past 30 years or so, they have become parts of regional groups, and within their region, they have free trade. Like, European Union, within Europe, they have free trade. Turkey became a part of that customs union, so it has free trade. Like NAFTA, I mean, Canada, US, so far, I mean, they had it. So they have free trade. And in Asia, in our region, it is the ASEAN which had free trade. But more recently, 2, 3 years ago, no, now it's almost 4, 5 years ago, they expanded that ASEAN to include countries like Japan, like Korea, like some other countries in the region, and it became what they call RCEP, Regional Cooperation for Economic Partnership. So all Asian Pacific countries, including Myanmar and Cambodia and very small countries and big countries like Australia and others, New Zealand, so they're part of that. Pakistan is not a part of any regional group. The only regional group it joined at one time was this South Asia Free Trade Area called SEFTA. But then the biggest economies in this region is India and then Pakistan and Bangladesh. But Pakistan doesn't allow, and also India then reacted. So they trade with India. So this never really got on. So Pakistan is not a part of any regional grouping. So this is, I think, another very bad thing that rest of the countries trade at least 40%, some 60%, 70% within their region. And Pakistan has less than 5% of trade within the region.
All right. So if we want to say if any reforms need to be made in terms of tariffs, or there needs to be a rationalization of tariffs that Pakistan imposes on other countries and so on and so forth, what do you think needs to be done, or what exactly should be the thought process behind the same? If you want to move
Yes,
from import substitution to an export-led growth model.
yes. I mean, that would mean that, we have, in addition to our tariffs, regulatory duties. Then in 2008, we started with having regulatory duties on top of our tariffs. In 2007, 8, there was this world was facing fuel and financial crisis. And so our trade deficit went up. So Pakistan put lots of regulatory duties, unlike other countries, which found some temporary solution, but Pakistan put those. And those regulatory duties over the time from 2008 onwards till even this year, last year budget, we kept increasing. So those regulatory duties, if our normal tariff may be 20%, then we have these regulatory duties, they're much higher. They go up to 95%. That was one thing. But then in 2014, they further worsened the situation. By introducing a new kind of duties called additional custom duties. It started with 1%, then 2%, then 3%, then 4, 5, 6, 7. So this, no other country has this kind of thing. So the very first thing we have to do is to get rid of these additional custom duties and regulatory duties, which we didn't have previously. These were introduced, as I say, 2018 and 2008 and 2014-15. And first, we have to get rid of them. The other big problem we have is that on our imports, like when we get our whatever bill and telephone bill or something, and then we add on other things like this and this levy. So it's the same thing with imports, that not only we have this normal tariffs, custom duty, and then we have additional custom duty, then we have regulatory duty, and then we also charge income tax. I mean, these goods arrive, there's nothing been done, no income has been earned, but then we have income tax. That becomes kind of tariff, because income tax is normally on some activity. You earn some income and you pay, but we have it on imports. And then we have, sales tax on imports, etc., and surcharges and everything. So all these extra levies have to be removed, as India and others have done, and that will be a big way forward.
All right, this makes sense. So essentially, we've got multiple layers of
Yes,
different duties and
yes,
tax,
yes,
which
yes,
is creating the post. I was just looking at air filters in
yes.
Pakistan and what would be the cumulative duty on top. So in the case of Pakistan, there was 56% additional duty that had to be paid, whereas the maximum in any other country was maybe around 18 to 20%. So the delta, as you said earlier, it's twice or even thrice of the average of other countries out there, of export-led countries out there.
Yes, and what happens? Because such high duties people try to avoid. So lots of these things come through the smuggling route, through other borders, through illegal, through misdeclaring, etc. And so our gray economy goes up. I mean, there's an estimate that maybe about $7-8 billion worth of goods are imported through smuggling. And then another terrible thing that happens is that we have to, because these duties are very high. So there are some very influential, lobbies and also those such things, and we end up giving them exemption from these duties. And you look at, for example, if we collected last year about 1,100 billion customs duties, and now we are paying, about 550 billion rupees in exemptions. I mean, it's crazy that we are, because of having these high duties, we have to give subsidies to some sectors which are more influential. And so if we were to reduce these tariffs in Pakistan, so at least this 550 billion subsidies will come down very substantially. And the other thing is the smuggling will come down very substantially. This will also bring more peace in our border region, because then, because of the smuggling, we have to have lots of agencies on the border region, rangers and this corps and that corps and customs, etc. And that brings unsettles those regions as well.
So, sir, two things you mentioned that Pakistan needs to do away with to improve its overall trade architecture. One, the excessive layers of duties and taxes, and the other one being integration with the regional trade blocs. So how does that work out?
Yes, it's not that complicated, because we recently, I mean, these additional custom duty and regulatory duties, etc., is a recent phenomenon. Pakistan didn't have them in the past. If they ever had it, it was temporary. It was just used for a temporary purpose. Now they've become a permanent feature, so they have to get rid of those additional duties and custom duties. And also income tax, etc., should not be charged when the imports come in. That's a subsequent, when a manufacturer sells those goods, or somebody value adds or something, then income tax is leviable, not on imports. Nobody does that. So Pakistan needs to get rid of these layers. That's the first thing. Second thing is, it must get into some regional arrangement, like regional cooperation for economic partnership. Pakistan should be recently, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka applied to become members. All other Asian Pacific countries, most of them, are members. This is the biggest trading bloc in the world. It's bigger than EU, it's bigger than the North American bloc, and Pakistan is still not done any homework to enter that. And maybe a linked thing is that most of trade now takes place through global value chains. It means that you get some components from one country, another components, and then you put it together. Pakistan is not a part of that. It's only 5% of its exports from that, and 50% of total trade is now taking place through that group. I think these are some of the very important measures that Pakistan need to take immediately.
How do you think Pakistan can essentially evolve its trade strategy, given in lights the tariffs imposed by the US?
Well, it should do what other countries are doing. I mean, they realize, I mean, not all other countries, because China is a much stronger, they can retaliate, EU can retaliate, Canada can do it, but our economy is much smaller. We cannot go that way. But what we can do is, like some of the other smaller countries have done, we bring down some of the tariffs, so that to ensure, because US is saying that there's too much of imbalance between the trade. Pakistan is exporting over 5 billion, and we buy only 2 billion. So we have to reduce that trade deficit. So we can bring down on some of tariffs on products of export interest to the US. That's one of the things. But in the meantime, we should also look, because the US has come out with a little booklet saying what kind of non-tariff barriers they face in Pakistan, and they are for our own good. We should try to address those, so that our trade flows, more freely.
What would be those non-trade barriers, Dr. Sav, if you can just elaborate on those?
For example, yeah, okay, like our customs valuation. When something comes in, we have a very strange system, unlike any other countries. Normally, there's a customs value is what is paid between a buyer and seller. We have our own, what we say, minimum import price. And that brings a lot of confusion and lots of court cases, etc. We should do what the international community does. If somebody for a machinery has paid $10,000 and has not committed any fraud, we should just take that 10,000 and put duty on that, and not just say some fictional, okay, it should be 20,000. Not leave it to the customs people to determine these values. That's one of the things. And then there are some other things, but maybe I think they're too long. But this is a major.
All right, this is it for yet another episode of All Things Money. We really delve deeper into how trade tariffs are working out and what Pakistan really needs to do to enhance its overall trade competitiveness. Till next time, thank you very much.